Hello. This is going to be a much shorter video than the last one. In fact, I'm not going to write much code at all. I'm just going to set you up and get you started with some tips and then ask you to implement the improvement in this chat room app that I've been building. And the improvement that I want to focus on this time is the ability to store not only messages that people send when they users send when they type in that box, but also some identification so that that message is tagged with the user that sent it. Okay. And so I'm going to get you started going down that road. I won't write much code at all, but I want to show you a couple of tricks. And the first one is that if we're going to store information about who sent the message, in addition to the message itself, we're going to have to change this array here and make it a little more robust so it can store more information. Right now that array just stores the post request data that was sent, and that's it. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's start the server. It's running. We'll refresh the page. We'll type in hello, hit send, and so that array right here now holds the string send. And if I send something else, like goodbye, it now holds goodbye. Now, both of those messages came from the same user. It's the same browser on the same computer, in fact. But what I'm going to do now is use my iPhone, and I'm going to visit the very same page. You can't see me doing this because I'm not screen recording my iPhone, but I promise it's in my hand. And I want you to watch the terminal window in red over there. And on my iPhone now, I'm going to send foo to the server. At least I think I'm going to send foo to the server. Here, let me connect to the server first. That might be a good idea. There we go. Okay, so what I did was I went, oh, there you go, yep. I sent several foos. So how did I do that? Well, I went up to my network preferences up here under the Wi-Fi or airport menu, whatever you call it on a Mac. I opened up my network preferences and I learned that the IP address of this computer here that's running the server is this here, 10.0.0.35. It's probably a little hard for you to see in the video by the time it gets rendered. 10.0.0.35. So I opened up my I opened Safari on my iPhone. I typed in 10.0.0.35 in the address bar of the browser, :5000. I had to put that in. And I got the same page you see here on my iPhone. And I just typed in the little input box, foo, a couple of times and hit send. And it sent it. Now that post data came from a completely different computer. And I would like it if somehow this information in here was uniquely identified. So, these two messages should have some identifier before them, and these two messages should have a different identifier before them. All right, so if we're going to do that, a couple of things have to happen. First off, as I said, this array has to change. So you might want to think about this array as being a little more sophisticated than what it is. It might have to contain some objects, some JSON objects, and they might look something like this: name, and I'm going to just fill them in right now. I'm going to hard code them right now. You wouldn't be doing this if you were writing this line for real in the server. I'm just giving you an example. This information would have to come in when you posted the request. So it could be named something like John, and then message would be hello. And that would be the first object in that array. And then the next one, according to what I just did, would be name. Again, this would be John because it came from the same computer. But then it would be message, and this time it would be goodbye. And then I have end up with another object in there. And these two came from my iPhone, which is a different user, technically. So instead of John, let's make that name Amy, and then message would be foo. And then, we'd have another one from Amy, a second foo from Amy. All right, you get the point. Now, I made up these keys. These keys can be anything that you would want them to be. I made them up, but I think name and message are appropriate in this context. So now what I have is an array. I still have my array brackets, right? But inside my array is not just individual strings like hello, goodbye, foo, 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 but it's an object in, see those curly brackets, right? With keys, name and message, and values, John and hello. And here the values are John and goodbye, and here the values are Amy and foo. And so I'm not going to actually, I'm not going to create this when I make my, in my code. I'm still going to just say var messages equals an array like that. But when the post request comes in here, instead of just pushing, it's this line right here, line 21, instead of just pushing the message in, I need to construct this whole thing and push that whole thing in. So I'm going to end up something like, I'm going to push in something to the effect of name, colon, and then I need a name there. I need, I can't hard code John. I'm going to have to get that from the user. Maybe I have to add another text box that the user clicks in to send their name. Okay, so this would end up being, it's going to end up being some variable that I get from here, from the body of the post request when it comes in. It won't come in on .message, but it'll, I have to go back to my JavaScript, and I have to, in client side, and I have to reconstruct that so that here it is. So when I send the post request, I am not just sending this payload, but perhaps something a little bit more. Okay? So I'm going to leave that up to you to decide how to do that, but you have to reconstruct the push here to put in a much more robust thing. So as I said, you might have a variable here, and it might be something like name, colon, and then it might be like uname, where that's a variable that you define up here and extract it from the body. And then you would have like message, colon, and actually I probably shouldn't use that. That'll be confusing. So instead of message, I might just say like MSG as my second key. And then in here, they would say message, because I already have that. And then don't forget, I need a curly brace to end that. And so that's what would end up getting pushed in. And then you would be able to have more information stored in that array, which not only gave messages, but who they were sent by. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this code and kind of go back to the way it is. So that's one thing that you need to think about now that I've shown you without showing you. Okay, now here's another trick. So when somebody starts posting messages, if they've been to your server before, then you can actually know that. You can just identify them automatically. And I'm going to show you a way to do it, and then I'm going to talk about a better way to do it, but more complicated. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to discuss being able to pull the IP address of the client that sent the post request. I want the server to grab the IP address and potentially use it to do something, and so to identify the client. So to show you how that works, what I'm going to do is inside this post request right here, I'm going to actually stop logging that, and instead I'm going to log REQ, which is my incoming request object. And then I get to actually just go like this. I get to say .ip. It's really that easy. I'm going to log the IP address of the client that sent the request. Cool. All right, let's save this and restart the server. Here we go. All right, it's running. Remember, the array is now empty. And so I'm going to go back to my browser, and I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm going to submit a WYBL. And I want you to watch here because I'm logging the IP address of this computer. All right, and there it goes. It says ::1. Now that's a little bit confusing because I'm on the computer that's running the server. So it's the same computer, right? This is my client. This is my server is running in here from the terminal. And so the IP address shows up as that. Okay, now if I send another message, hello, again, it shows up as that. But now I'm going to come over to my iPhone and I'm going to do a similar thing. So again, you can't see me, but I've got the page open on my iPhone. I'm clicking in the box here and I'm typing in wobble. WB, at least I'm trying to, BBLE. Okay, and I'm clicking send in Safari on my iPhone. There it is. And okay, and there you got a very different address for my phone. Okay, let me send another request by my phone. There it is. And you can see my phone always comes up as having the same IP address. And my computer comes up as this. Your computer will always come up as ::1 if it's running the server and you go to it. You go to the server from a browser on that computer. Now, if I went and took, my wife's iPhone or one of my kids' iPhones or any other computer in the house that's on my wireless network that can communicate with this computer, and I visited this server, I would get yet another unique IP address. And those IP addresses are unique to those devices in my house, as long as they're in my house. When they leave my house and come back, they might get a different address. It's up to my network to assign them an address every time they come in the house. And it may not be the same one. My iPhone has 10.0.0.12. You saw my computer before had 10.0.0.35. All of the devices in my house have IP addresses that start with 10.0.0. something, 0 through, actually 0 and 1 are probably reserved for the router itself, but from 2 up. And I don't have more than 99 devices in my house, so I think we're covered with these numbers right here. Okay, so all I'm saying is, and you can read a lot more about IP addressing. It's actually a really interesting concept, but every device that's on the network has its own unique IP address. And what I'm going to put forward here is you can identify the client that just connected to you and sent the post request by its IP address. So imagine if in the server I made an array called addresses, or addresses, however you want to say it. And it just starts out as an empty array. And every time somebody sends a message to the server with a post request, I extract this IP address right here and I do this kind of a thing. I push it into this array. And then when a new request comes in a little while later, I grab the IP address of the incoming request and I search through this array. I look through it linearly, item by item by item by item, to see if that request is in there. Or sorry, if that address is in there. And if it is, then I recognize the computer as being one that I've seen before. And I could even go so far as to make some kind of table here which essentially associated IP addresses with names that people typed. So if I had, say, another box on this page that you could type your name in, and when I clicked send, it would send not only the message but also your name, then what I could do is inside here I could make a little data structure that had something like name, and it would end up being something like this, John, and then I would have IP, and then I don't really know what it would end up being. Let's say that's 10.0.0.12. That's my phone, and then I would wind up with somebody else inside here with name and whatever. You get the point. And so that way, every time a request came in from a computer, I could immediately look through this identity table and see if I could find this thing. And if I did find it, then I would know who the message was from. And if I don't find an IP address anywhere in the table, if it just doesn't show up anywhere in the table that I've built, then I would probably send the client to another page. I would create another web page other than index.html, and I would send from my server inside this request, I would actually send them to that page and ask them for their name at that page. I would put some kind of conditional in here, so it would be something like if, and I'm not really going to write the code, but just kind of like fake code or pseudocode. So if IP address is found in my table, then all good. Send a response and be done. Else, send a different HTML page with a sign in. And if you were doing this for real, you actually would do sign in. You would have authentication and sign in, which we're not going to get to. But you could just send the user back to another page that asks them for their name. All right, that's the whole idea. So what you do inside here depends upon whether or not you actually have found the IP address. And then it's also up to you how you want to construct this table. Do you want name and IP, or would you rather see it the other way around? Would it be better if we did IP and then 10.0.0.12 and then name Fred or something like that? It might be easier to do the lookup then, right? Because you could just look through all the keys inside the objects that were in this array, because you're going to have more. Every time somebody makes a post request from a different phone, you're going to wind up with, or a different computer, you're going to wind up with a new one of these. You just kind of like hopscotch through the array and you look at every one of these things and you decide if it matches the IP address that you just received. And then you respond accordingly with what you do. All right, so I'm not going to tell you too much more because I think it's up to you to figure out how you would go about implementing something like that. So this is really open-ended. There are many, many ways to do it. And I'm going to end by saying that actually, when it's all said and done, there's a better way to do this, and it's called sessions and cookies. So if you want to read a little bit about that, you can do that as well. I think that ends up being a little more advanced, and it's kind of a good exercise to work with IP addresses for a little while. But just be aware that there is a way that when somebody visits you, when a client visits the server can actually send back a little bit of identification data that it implants into the browser on the client, and that's called a cookie. And when that, for all future visits to this site, that cookie will get sent from the browser. And that way the server can identify that it knows which browser it's seeing again. Right? So it's a lot like, if it were the first day of school and 100 students walked into the cafeteria and I was in charge of some kind of like study hall period or something like that. There's 100 kids, I can't keep track of them. So I give each one a little piece of paper and I write something unique on that piece of paper and I give it to them. And then when they come back into the cafeteria the next day, they hand me that paper if they have it. And I immediately look at it and say, oh, I know who you are because I wrote this and gave it to you. I gave you an identifier and now you're giving it back to me. So I know I've seen you before. And there'd be some kids that came in who weren't there the first day of school and they wouldn't have one of those little pieces of paper. So I would be like, I don't know who you are. Right? And that's what a cookie is. You've heard of these things, right? So that's what happens. The server gives the browser a little bit of information that the browser stores, and then it just gives it back to the server every time it revisits it. And that lets the server know that it's an identified client. And so the way that you implement that is by using something called sessions. Sessions are the way that you implement cookies. And Express has that built in as a package. You can actually do that. And if you were to do that type of thing, then it would supersede your need for getting dirty with this code and figuring out how to find IP addresses and write your own array to keep track of clients that are connected and that have sent messages and etc. But I really, really, really think that it's best to do something like this first before you just go to the package and use a session without really knowing what's going on. So there you go. Your job is to, over the course of the weekend, is to change this program in some way so that the messages are tagged by either name of the user that sent it, or IP address of the computer that sent it, or somehow both. And I've given you a whole bunch of different ideas to play with, and I don't want to be any more specific than that because I want to see what you do with this, okay? So there you have it. Good luck, and I'll be available for questions. You're going to get this in time for Friday morning. So when you're looking at this, it'll be May, where are we? It'll be the 22nd of May, and I'll be around for questions. All right. Take care. Good luck.